Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, ADHD and Indigenous Strength, Understanding, Adapting, and Thriving with Cody Taylor. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health and the First Nations Health Authority. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before I formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam Nation. Feel free to introduce yourself and the nation you're calling in from in the chat. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarain Squawkin. I am the Learning Circle Manager. I am Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory, Apache, and Belgian Settler on my father's side. I will be the moderator for today's Learning Circle. And working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Kira and Ella, our program assistants. They'll be interacting with everyone in the chat. And before we formally begin, I'd like to provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering, so please make sure to look after yourself. We'll share some resources in the chat. If you need to reach out to a friend, counselor, elder, or colleague, don't hesitate to do so. We will provide additional supports in the chat. And now I'll turn it over to Cody to introduce himself.
Thanks so much. Gailka Stefla, Nuguam, Kyodi, Lu Tadala Yuans, Hammond Umpla Numas, Lu Irene Mills, Kennedy Aukyang, Gayathan Lok Ukwanales, Lu Flin on the guy. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kyodi and Tadala Yuans. My dad was Les Taylor, my mother is Irene Mills, and I come from Kinkham and Skidegate. So that's my intro. Before we get started, I want to compare three different situations. So there's one, a father walks in on his child doing some homework, and she has a TV on in the background playing one show. She's listening to audio and headphones while she's stretching and she's doing her homework. And he asks her, "How are you able to study with all that going on?" And the response is, "I don't know, but it works for me." There's another kid, they're in school, like it's elementary school, and the teacher notices that they're having a hard time sitting still. And so whenever that child and a bunch of the other children have a hard time, she tells them to go run around outside. Not as a punishment. She just says, "Go run around, burn off some steam, and then come back in when you burned it all off." And then the third situation was I was taught, do what you're told, when you're told, exactly as you're told, and nothing but what you're told. And one of the reasons why I like to highlight these three different situations is in the first example, somebody found out for themselves what works for them. The second one, they were guided into what works for them. And then in my situation, I was kind of guided into things that didn't work for me. And I think up until now, it was left up to chance whether or not people found out what worked for them and what worked for their brain. And it's one of my beliefs that we can make sure that it isn't left up to chance, that we can be really intentional about making sure that everybody finds out what works for them. Before I get too into it, I want to point out, so this is my mom and me. Growing up was one of my favorite pictures, and I just recently found out as an adult that the actual story behind it was she was working so hard, she had no energy to lift me off her face, and I just thought it was really funny, and so I just kept on laying on it. And I think this really is a great example of her. She worked really hard to try to make sure that she could do the best that she could, and she worked really, really hard. And I'm going to be talking about like what I went through growing up and the things that I found difficult. I don't want anybody to think that I hold anything against my mom for it. I know that she did the best that she could, and that goes along with everybody else in my family. So kind of a brief overview of what we're going to go through. I'm going to talk about my experience, what ADHD is and what contributes to it. I'm going to talk about like what my beliefs are around ADHD and Indigenous people. And we might have to like really gloss over system building because that's like a half day topic or a full day topic. And I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A. And as we go, please ask questions. I don't often like to just like talk at a recording or a screen for hours on end. And I do best when people are asking questions and asking me to elaborate on things. So I like to use this as an example in any of the workshops that I do. I say if I bring two people up here and I give one of them this wooden block and I give the other one these metal puzzles, would it be fair for me to compare their results? And I think most people would say that it's not fair. If I ask somebody to come up here and do a backflip and I gave them no training whatsoever, I say like, is that fair? And most people also would say no. The thing that I want to mention is we do this all the time to kids and people with ADHD, but because it's going on in their brain, we just don't realize it because we can't see it. This is my big disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I don't have a degree in this. I just struggled through this on my own with like little support and information. And so I'm just here trying to pass on what I've learned to hopefully help some other people. But when in doubt, like try to find a doctor to if you're trying to do something. So why am I, out of all people, speaking on this? So I've had ADHD my whole life and I've struggled with it. I dropped out of post-secondary school. I struggled with video game and social media addiction, drinking and substance use, obesity, and I had a mental breakdown 3 years ago. And in that time, I've like worked on my trauma, and now I've developed a bunch of systems that support myself with my ADHD in almost every area of my life. The way that I realized is I had three things kind of happen all at once. And so this was during the lockdown. And during the lockdown, I wanted to make a bilingual baby book for my communities. And so I was like working on getting that project made. And then right when it was about to deliver, my dad passed away. And I was trying to support my family and trying to be like support them in whatever way that I could. And I started a new job. And so all those three things combined led my mental health to decline until I eventually had a mental health crisis. The big thing that made me realize was I had a company and I needed to do my taxes. And I had like the due date, and months leading up to the due date, I told myself, like, just do your taxes, do your taxes. And every day after work, I would come home and try to get done, and I couldn't. That due date came and went, and still I would try to sit there and get them done, and I couldn't. And I got letter after letter after letter saying, do your taxes from the government. Eventually, I got a letter that said, do your taxes in 2 weeks or we're going to dissolve your company. I got it like on a Wednesday. And then that Saturday, I sat down for 6 hours and I did my taxes. And when I finished, I looked at them and I couldn't understand why it take me so long. Because I was like, if I had just done this 8 months ago, I wouldn't have had to struggle so much. And it was around then that I realized that something wasn't right. So the top three pictures, this is what my room looked like right after my mental breakdown. So it had been like this for a long time. It was really messy and disorganized, and I couldn't clean it up, and I didn't know why. And the bottom pictures are lists and notes that I had for myself right after the mental breakdown. And it was like reminders of to like write down when I ate and different lists to remind myself on like how to brush my teeth and stuff. So I eventually got a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a family doctor, and a therapist. And I got diagnosed with ADHD, social anxiety, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and complex PTSD. This is a brief little mental health journey. So in May of 2022 is when I suspected that I had ADHD. And then in June was when I had my mental health crisis and I got a leave from work and a family doctor. July is when I got my psychiatrist and I got on medication and started working on my ADHD. May of 2023 is when my ADHD symptoms, I had them under control enough that I could start working on my anxiety with my psychologist. And then August, I started working on my OCPD. December is when I got diagnosed with the complex PTSD, and I worked on that from December and January. January, I wrapped up with psychologist, and then June, I came off of my medication full time. This is just kind of overview. I see that these are like the focuses. I still worked on my ADHD and everything else while the other things were going on, but I wanted to be very clear about what I was working on at any given time. And I wasn't going to move on from my ADHD symptoms until I had them mostly under control. These are just my results. We don't have to go over them too much, but these are just the results from the obsessive compulsive symptoms, depression, stress, and anxiety. And this is what I got from my psychologist. And you can just kind of see the symptoms kind of decrease over time.
Oh, we got a question here.
Yep.
The one question is just wondering, how long were you away from work?
Not long enough to tell you the truth. I think I was away from work for like 2 or 3 months, and that only reason was because I couldn't get an extension from my psychiatrist. When I told the health person at work that I was coming back, they actually asked me if I wanted to be gone for longer. And looking back on it, I kind of wish that I had, just because when I went back to work, I wasn't in nearly enough, like good enough spot to be there. And I wish that I'd taken more time. I wish I'd taken like, I don't know, 6, 9 months, something like that.
Um, a few more questions here.
Yeah.
When you were assessed, were you also assessed for autism?
I wasn't. A part of me is kind of wondered if I like have autism for most of my life. For my whole life, I thought like I've been confused by social situations, but I didn't go at the time, and I might in the future because I still think that I might be a little bit, but no, I didn't.
Through the process of this, how did you develop these systems? Which specialist helps with setting these up? Like, which healthcare professional kind of was guiding you through this process?
Um, The person who helped me the most was the psychologist, but that was specifically for anxiety and OCPD. So they were a specialist in anxiety. There, especially was general anxiety, but I went for my social anxiety, and they did. I think we did a CPT program that they had developed, and they just like took me through our process, and so that was wonderful. But when it comes to the systems for my ADHD, unfortunately, there's like not a lot of help out there. All of the different clinics that I talked to, they weren't even taking people on a wait list anymore because it had reached like 2 years. Um, just because I think so many people have gotten diagnosed or been struggling more lately. And so all the systems that I developed, it was just from me reading a lot about it and then trial and error. And so when I say that I have a part on like system building, it's kind of just like what I've learned over like 3 years of building systems for myself. So when it comes to that side, like nobody was really there to help. And it's kind of one of the downsides of the mental health care in Canada right now.
And we'll just go for one more question and then we'll carry on
Yeah.
with the presentation. When you stopped taking medications, or if you were taking medications and you stopped, did you find that you were disassociating?
For me personally, not particularly. Um, I was kind of mentally drained. So when I quit taking medications, I had quit my job to like get a business off the ground. And so I was just working all the time. And so I was kind of just like too in my routine because I just needed to work every day to try to make it work that I didn't really have time to notice anything else. But I didn't notice me disassociating at all.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. And so I like to point out like where I am now because it's like that was like all really difficult. So now I do public speaking, I do presentations and workshops on ADHD, kind of like just like this, ranging anywhere from like 20 minutes to 2 days. And then I work full time on my business. And the reason why I like to point this out is like from where I was when I had my mental breakdown and how hard everything was, now I'm living a life that I'm like completely happy with. And like I feel like this is the life that I should have been living the entire time. And even before I got diagnosed, I used to think that there was something like broken or wrong with me, and I could never know what it was. And so I actually would use like drinking or video games or substances or whatever, and I would just use it to try to like cover up this like broken feeling that I felt. And so it wasn't until after I like got everything processed and I was able to reflect, and I was just like, oh, this is the person that I should have been the entire time, because I felt like whole and content. I think it's really like I always want to know when I'm talking to people like what they think their biggest value is. And so I think some of my biggest values like general information. I've learned a lot about a lot of different topics, but I don't have the depth that a specialist does. I'm really good at explaining the struggles that people with ADHD have and why they're having them, what it's like to be a kid growing up through like or in a household or in school with ADHD, talking about how ADHD specifically affects Indigenous communities. And this isn't like research back. This is just like my own personal beliefs from like what I've seen. And then especially strategies for living and managing ADHD. And so what ADHD is, this is like one of the textbook DSM definitions, is a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity, impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. And that interferes is really, really important. And so there's the physical differences in the brain, and then there are the symptoms that those differences cause, and you need both of them. And like the symptoms that are being caused by these differences, they have to be negatively affecting your life to a larger degree than most people. And so you can have the underlying brain structure of ADHD and the symptoms, but if those symptoms aren't negatively affecting your life, then you don't get diagnosed with ADHD. It might just say that you have like ADHD-like symptoms. I'm going to be mentioning some scientific articles. And so for people that haven't read a lot, I just like to point this out. If I say like one study, That doesn't mean that something's conclusive. It just means like it's interesting, but probably needs more research. And then if I say that there are multiple studies, that means like I'm becoming more sure about what the results are, as long as they all say the same thing. And then if there are reviews or meta-analysis, this is where they bring a bunch of studies all together. You become even more sure, at least for me. So my bias is I usually look for reviews and meta-analysis, and I also usually look for newer reviews rather than older ones. And so a lot of my information comes from reviews and meta-analysis. So just three of the physical differences, there's a lot. This is a review, I think, and it looked at 174 MRI and fMRI studies, and it looked at 24,000 samples, and it pretty much just like pointed out all the differences. And I really like to mention the results from this study just because I think it's really important. So I'm just going to read it out. Compelling evidence shows ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disability, not a socially determined set of behaviors. Results point to an urgent need for teacher professional learning and systematic, up-to-date pre-service teacher education, along with inclusive education policy reform. The reason why I like to point this out is I think there's still like a really big negative association with ADHD, and people will used to be think that you could like parent away ADHD, that if you just parented better, it would go away. And it's not the case. There is a physical difference, just like there's a physical difference in people's eyes who need glasses. And there's no amount of parenting that's going to get rid of that.
One thing with that, someone was just kind of asking for supports that you found with your culture and community. So I know in Indigenous health, we kind of talk about how uh, Indigenous health models are a lot different than colonial health models, and how we're we're more strength based, and what you're kind of talking about here is more speaking from a deficit base with
Interesting.
ADHD. Have you, like, through your process with this, have you developed any cultural ones while through the process of learning your diagnosis?
I haven't done any cultural supports. And one of the things that I do want to say about culture is I think there was a study down in Australia, and they looked at what role culture has in ADHD for like students. And what they found was Indigenous students who said that culture is really important to them actually had a lower rate of ADHD, so where it was negatively affecting their life compared to students who didn't. And I think another really big thing that culture can play a role in is there's this thing called resilience, and we'll like talk about it a little bit as we go along. But a sense of belonging and a healthy community, like those are things of resilience, and that can kind of like support people with ADHD. And I'm also really glad that you brought up this like strength-based look on it. I don't have it on here because I kind of spaced when I was doing it. I talk about all the systems that I have on the ways of supporting myself for the different like struggles that I have. But to get my business off the ground, I absolutely used my ADHD to help me get it. And so one of the things that I did was, and this is something that I got from my mom when I was younger, is when I was growing up, she didn't have a TV in the house. And so because there was no TV and there was no easy source of dopamine, I had to be more creative and I had to read books. And so because of that, I like was an avid book reader when I was growing up. But that was only because it was the most interesting thing in my environment. And so as I learned more about myself, I realized that whatever work I need to get done, if I make it the most interesting thing in my environment, I will almost be forced to do it because I can't be bored for a second. So if my phone's locked up, my video games is locked up, I don't have a TV, and I have a project that I'm really interested in and is there, I can work on it for hours because I don't like the sensation of being bored. And then there's also other things like as a kid, I was always one of the first people to be crying. So my emotional dysregulation came from like being really sensitive and crying all the time. And so now when I like really have something that needs to get done, I'll like bring myself to the library, let's say, and I'll have my work there. And anytime that I want to like take a break and I get that voice in my head that's like, you've been working really hard, take a couple days off, go hang out with your friends, all that kind of stuff. I tell myself, and this is something that I've like done is I stop what I'm doing and I imagine like a little version of myself and I tell him if I want to take a break, I need to tell them I know what you're going through and I know how hard you have it and I have the ability to help you, but I'm not going to because I'm going to go hang out with my friends. And I actually like let the sensation of like the strength of like how sad I'm getting at that moment kind of put me back to work. And it's because I decide what I want to do, what goals I have, and what I want to achieve. And I'll use every aspect of myself to help me achieve that goal. And so I'm not talking about it in here because I just kind of forgot, but I do want to say that like once you learn about how you work, anything where somebody says that it's a detriment for ADHD, you absolutely can use it to your advantage. Not to your advantage, but just so you can reach your own goals. And I think it is really important to highlight. So thank you so much for bringing it up.
Mhm.
So the person who needs glasses, they experience the world in a way that makes it more difficult if they don't have glasses on. And just like a person with ADHD experiences the world in a way that makes it more difficult if they don't have certain supports. And so these three differences, at least three of the ones that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about this underdevelopment in the prefrontal cortex, dopamine dysregulation, and this thing called like a default mode network. And so getting upset at anyone for struggling to fit into an environment that wasn't designed for them is like getting upset at a kid who needs glasses for bumping into things when they haven't been given an eye exam or a pair of glasses. And so what does the prefrontal cortex do? It's associated with these things called executive functions. There's a bunch of different ways of defining it. This is just one of them, but it's like planning, organizing, prioritizing, impulse control, emotional regulation, internal motivation, short-term memory, and sense of time. And so at the very beginning, when I was talking about those different puzzles and that backflip, if you give two people, one person with ADHD and one person without, any task that involves any one of those executive functions, it's like you gave them a harder puzzle compared to the person who doesn't have ADHD. And also, if you give them that task and you haven't taught them how to do that task, it's like asking them to come up and do a backflip when you haven't given them the proper training. And like I think it's just important to be aware of it so that you can spend more time working on these things and then not beating yourself up if you struggle a little bit more with some of these. So in someone with ADHD, the prefrontal cortex may be underdeveloped or not as active. When they've studied it, it's been about 30 to 40% behind their peers in executive function. The prefrontal cortex like physically develops until you're about your mid 20s, and executive function doesn't peak until you're about 30 or 35. So a 20-year-old would have the executive function of a 12-year-old, a 30-year-old would have the executive function of an 18-year-old. And one of the things I like to bring up is like, does anybody know anyone who was like more haywire when they were younger than mellowed out in their mid 30s? Or does anybody think that they were more emotionally charged when they were in their teens or 20s? And if you said yes to either of those, it's literally just because your brain is still developing. And so I'm just going to go over these again. I really want to like hammer home how hard it can be to do some of these, especially when people are struggling. So imagine someone struggling with ADHD to like the absolute worst degree. And what do you think they feel when they need to like do planning, organizing, or prioritizing, and they're looking at this mess? And because we can't do the chat, what do you think someone's going to feel if they are struggling with their symptoms when they're looking at this?
I think like overwhelmed, overstimulated, hopelessness.
Mhm. Frustration. You
Mm-hmm.
start to beat yourself up because you're like, why can't I do this? It's such a simple task.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was me. And so I like knew that I had ADHD and I was like trying to clean this up. And I couldn't look at something on the ground and decide if it was the thrift store, garbage, uh, or if I was going to keep it. And anytime I would look at it and I would try to figure it out, it's like my brain wouldn't just like make that connection and it actually started to like physically hurt my brain. And then one of the downsides, I was actually living in a house with like four or five other guys. And normally I'm like, it was kind of prideful and I wouldn't want to ask for help. But I asked them for help cleaning up my room just because I couldn't make the decision. Um, but because it's like an invisible thing, they like ended up saying no. And I ended up having to call one of my friends. And like luckily they drove half an hour to come help me out. And I was so ashamed at not being able to like decide where something went. I told them I can physically do it. I just need you to make the decision. And I don't care if you tell me all of it needs to go in the garbage. I just can't do that deciding part.
With that, we kind of have a few questions
Yep.
that stem with that. So it sounds like for yourself, you had some internalized stigma and like societal pressures of what you should be. And it seems like a lot of parents and Indigenous communities tend to have that too, maybe that stemming from colonial pressures and whatnot. What, through your process of like learning this, how have you either unlearned it or it helped support yourself, especially your inner child. You kind of spoke about that earlier.
Yeah, the one I had a lot, I cried a lot. I when I was going through this whole thing. I did a lot of internal work. I think it's really common for people to beat themselves up. They have this like really internal, like negative voice. And one of the first things that I did was, or not first, but like along the way, is I just started recognizing it. And so I was like, this week I'm just going to recognize what I'm talking about myself poorly. And then after I spent a week recognizing it, then I started replacing that with like a positive voice on just like, it's okay. You've had a hard life. You've been struggling with this your whole life. Be easy on yourself. Tomorrow's going to be a better day. And I actually, the first time I did it, I got emotional. I started crying just because I had never spoken to myself like that before. And then I just kept on doing it. And then one of the nice things about it is as you do that more and more, then it just becomes your normal. And so now whenever I have any kind of setback, I just kind of like laugh it off and I just like know it's a part of how my brain is works. And tomorrow is going to be a better day. Because that really beating yourself up on it, it kind of makes it makes it a lot harder to progress. Yeah. So short-term memory, what do you think someone struggling with like really intense short-term memory problems is going to experience, just in general?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Somebody who's struggling with short-term memory, like to a really severe degree, what do you think they're gonna?
I think that can affect a lot of confusion, make you miss appointments,
Yep.
as some people have shared, develop anxiety. I think it also just maybe changed the way you navigate the world,
Yep.
like because you're not as excited to go to things because of the many steps that you could miss along the way. So losing out on opportunities and whatnot. So
Yep, absolutely. All of those things. And then, so specifically, right after I have my mental breakdown, I'm not sure if it shows up on the screen, but the bottom right and the left-hand picture, it literally says, "Have you eaten?" You might get bored and forget that you've eaten, like write down. And so it literally says breakfast and then 7:30 and then what I ate. And the reason why I had that list there was, I remember being in the kitchen and I like ate a banana and I threw it out. And I turned around and then I lost the last like 15 or 20 minutes and I didn't know why I was in the kitchen. And I was like, oh, I must be hungry. I went and grabbed another banana, ate it, threw it out. And then I saw the banana peel there and I was like, have I already eaten it? Turned around, forgot it. Did the whole thing again. And eventually there was like three banana peels there. And I'm just like, have I just eaten three banana peels like bananas in a row? And so I needed a list to remind myself that I'd eaten because it was so bad. And then on the bottom right hand side, there's a little list that says T for teeth and it says brush, floss, rinse, and then face, wash, and moisturize. And I would brush my teeth, put my toothbrush down, and then forget the past 5 minutes, and then be like, "Why am I in the bathroom? I must be here to brush my teeth." And I'd brush my teeth again. And I'm not sure if anybody's brushed their teeth when they're already clean, but it doesn't feel right. Um, and yeah, and so I needed a list there, and I literally had to like put my finger on the list while I was brushing my teeth, and then when I was done, put it on floss and put it down, just so that I could get through the day. I had to do that for like quite a few weeks. And then motivation. So I need to take some recycling down 4 flights of stairs. I've timed myself since then. It's a 4 minute task. How long do you think it took me to do it? All of my devices and things and distractions were all locked up, and I just had to do this one task.
I know for myself, I leave recycling for like a long time,
Yeah.
so it probably took you a long time.
Yeah. So this was the only thing that I wanted to do in a day, and it took me 8 hours. I woke up at 6 a.m. and I was just like, I just need to do this one task. I just need to take the recycling downstairs. And I paced and I paced and I paced and I just couldn't do it. And so when people are struggling with internal motivation, this is what it can look like. And so even things that you want to do, that you really want to do, because you're like lacking some of this internal motivation, it just makes it really hard or almost impossible to do the task sometime.
I know like one thing too is the amount of doors because those are literally physical barriers to get through.
Yeah.
Um, can be another challenge for myself because then I'm like, I have to go through that door, that door, along with carrying
Yeah.
three big bags of recycling because I left it for that long, you know? So it's almost like an added thing. And I think a lot of the times neurotypical people are kind of like, oh, well, why don't you just do it weekly? And it's like, that's another task on the amount of little tasks that I already have to think about.
100%.
So
Yeah, the amount of doors and also like the amount of steps. And so like let's say like you like I want to go to the gym more often. If you have to go like remember like grab your shorts, grab a water bottle and grab all these other things, those are all individual steps and it's all like more planning and organizing. And so like one of the systems I ended up doing was I try to make it as easy as possible to do whatever I want to do. And so I literally have a gym bag that just has all my things that I need for the gym just in that bag. I have a work bag that just has all of the things that I need for work. And I have the same thing with a travel bag. And so I don't need to be moving things around. And sometimes I have doubles and triples of things just each in the individual bag. Because I know if I grab one from one bag and put it into another bag, I'm going to forget it. And then I'm going to get where I'm going and not have it.
I know another colleague mentioned that this is similar to like the spoon theory. So you're given like a handful of spoons a day, and each task or um, each step along the way takes a spoon. And then by the end of the day, you either have a few spoons left or no spoons left,
Yeah,
which kind of like talks about like motivation and work.
100%.
So
Yeah, it's a little like later on in the slides. So my version of spoons is like cups in a pitcher. And so everybody has a pitcher and they fill up cups. And then we can like talk about that when we get it. But it's the exact same thing as the spoons. And so yeah, it's right here. And so I say imagine somebody has so on the left you have a 1 liter pitcher, and then on the right you have a 2 liter pitcher. And then under the 1 liter pitcher you have these 330 ml cups, and then under the 2 liter pitcher you have these 250 ml cups. And so the person with the bigger pitcher, they can easily fill up all their cups like throughout the day. And then the person with the smaller pitcher, they're only going to be able to fill up a few, and then they're done. And so it's no matter how hard they want to fill up that next cup, they just can't because they don't have anything left. And it's the exact same idea. And so one of the big problems arises when like we compare ourselves to people or compare these two people when it comes to executive functions, or we'll compare ourselves to other people because we don't know like how big their pitcher is or how many spoons they have. And so society and school specifically, they highly value executive function. Like these like quote unquote like good kids, generally speaking, exhibit high levels of executive function. They can sit still, they can not blurt out, they can do work they're not that interested in, all those types of things. So if you have a 1 liter pitcher and I keep on putting more cups in front of you and I keep on expecting you to fill it, whose fault is it when you run out? And if I can see you have a pitcher, I see you have a 1 liter pitcher and I'm like putting cups in front of you and I put more and more and more.
I think it's like if you can see that I have a pitcher that is visibly not going to accommodate the amount of cups that are being put there, unless I tell you, hey, my pitcher's not going to accommodate that many cups. I think it's similar to that situation where it's like you have to tell people what you need, so they're able to not either go beyond your capacity, but also just understanding like boundaries and whatnot.
100%. I use this example, and so I like visuals, and so like for kids that are in school, I think it's like our fault for putting them in there and like putting more and more cups in front of them. But the thing is like we can't see their picture, and then so we don't know. We only see what results from when their picture's empty. And so it's like we put more and more cups in front of them, and then they have an emotional outburst, or they have trouble studying, or they any number of things. And then we don't know because we don't know we can't visually see their capacity. And so then the other thing is sometimes if we're talking about ourselves as adults, we're putting more and more cups in front of ourselves, and then we beat ourselves up for not being able to fill them up. And I think but being way more gentle with yourself on what your capacity is, knowing what your capacity is, and then there are even things that you can do to like give yourself a bigger pitcher or like make the cup smaller, take away cups. There's a bunch of things that you can do to like get you through the day where you're not constantly drained all the time. Ever since I had brain fog for like my whole like mental breakdown for like quite a few years, but I haven't had to deal with brain fog for probably about a year now. And I push myself really hard. I get a lot of work done, and it's just from like knowing, yeah, what my picture is and then how to get the most out of it. Yeah, so the picture is a child, a person's executive function like a fuel tank, for lack of a better word. And then we need to understand that like we're making them, at least when it comes to kids, we're making them like be in a school or we're making ourselves go to a job that isn't designed for how their brain works. And so we're the ones that are putting more and more cups in either in front of them or in front of ourselves. For adults with ADHD, you need to understand that you're existing in a world or society that isn't necessarily designed for how your brain operates. The people with like ADHD and like general population is like 5%, I think. And so the world's kind of designed for how most people work. People will hear that you have ADHD, not know what it means, and then still expect you to work in a way that like that they're used to or that they're comfortable with. And so I think like learning what like how your brain works, what works for you, what can like get you through the day, and then really advocate for yourself. I know a lot about how my brain works and I advocate for myself constantly, but still when I've been like working for other people a lot of the times, I'll tell them what accommodations I need, but they hear that and then they take it through their own lens and then they try to like help you in a way that they would want rather than like what you're literally asking for.
Just like I've heard you talk about breadcrumbs. You pick them up. You like, do you like small talk? Do you tolerate small talk? I know you're good at it.
So I have to tell you this story. So I have a colleague who is autistic, and we've worked together for over a decade, and we work very well together. And I walked into his office one morning. I was in a big hurry, and I said, "Hey, the client you're seeing today, pa 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 pa." And then I caught myself and said, "I'm sorry. That was so rude of me. How was your weekend?" And he laughed and he was like, "Seriously, I do not need you to ask me about my weekend. I do that for you guys," meaning all of us non-autistic colleagues. "And I'm good if we never ever do that again." And to be clear, like I think Eric and I like really like each other and work very, very well together. But he's like, "I feel no need to get into any of those social niceties." So that was probably 2, maybe 3 years ago. I cannot tell you how hard it is for me to like engage my prefrontal lobe and stop my natural way of interacting when I see him and not say, "Hey, what's new? How's your daughter? What's going on? You taking a vacation this summer?"
Whoa. So for
It's
you,
so
you're
hard.
putting on a break to
Yeah.
not do that. Like for
Yes.
me, and I think for Patrick, it's like forcing myself. It's like I have to hit the gas to
Yes.
get myself to ask those damn questions that I really don't like. But for you, it's like putting on a break, it's holding something back. Okay.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I like this is one, the neurotypical person said that they need to engage their prefrontal lobe. This is the thing that people with ADHD struggle with a little bit more. And the other was like restraining your natural way of interacting. And I think people with ADHD from like a very young age, especially like in the school, all of it is designed to restrict how you naturally interact with the world. One example is I got told to sit still for so much as a kid, both in the home and the school, that I forgot that I like to move. And when I had my mental breakdown, I remember I was laying on a tennis court, just like staring at the sun. It was like a day or two after. And I remember like thinking, I hear people with ADHD like to move. I wonder if I like to move. And so I started to shake my leg just to see what it would feel like. And I remember it felt like there was an itch in my brain that was just really enjoyable that I just had never scratched. And so now I stim all the time, especially when I'm drained and I don't restrict it at all. But people get conditioned from a very young age that how you naturally interact with the world isn't okay. And that so you need to restrict it. And I think both like neurodivergent people and then also indigenous people, at least like when I go and interact with like a non-indigenous space, a lot of the times I think it's like called like code switching. So I think code switching and masking are both like restricting your natural way of interacting. And so we have, especially with people with ADHD, you have people with like a smaller picture to begin with, but then as their default, we're making them restrict and use some of that just to like fit in with what we expect them to be able to do in society. Another one, like most people I'm pretty sure have heard about is like dopamine. So one of the things, like it's like a dopamine dysregulation. People with ADHD, they just don't make as much dopamine as like neurotypical people, and so the brain needs a certain level of dopamine for proper focus. And so if an environment isn't giving them that dopamine or that stimulation, they're going to try to like create it on their own. And by created, I don't mean they're like literally making more dopamine. That's when they start daydreaming or fidgeting or drawing or doing whatever, just because they need that extra stimulation and the environment they're in isn't providing it. So I like to use the example of imagine that you're being underwater and everybody has a snorkel or a scuba tank except for you. How long are you going to be able to last until getting air is the only thing you're going to be able to think about? And then how well are you going to be able to focus? When I was like trying to reduce my cell phone usage, one of the things that I ended up doing was like locking up my laptop. And so I installed this little latch and I put a lock. And I had parental controls on my phone, so I couldn't do anything interesting on it. And my laptop was all locked up. And I got so low dopamine, and my brain wanted it so badly. I went and got tools out, and I started disassembling my dresser. And the entire time, I'm screaming in my head, like, "Don't do this. You chose to do this. You don't want to be on your devices," like over and over and over again. And still, I couldn't stop myself. And I want to point out this is with a fully developed brain, and like I made the choice to lock it up. And this is still how badly my brain wanted dopamine. And then the last thing when it comes to the differences is this thing called like a default mode network. I think like less people have generally heard about this. And it's a process in the brain that is active when you're daydreaming and then it turns off when you're like given a task. So for people with ADHD, the default mode network, it doesn't turn off all the way when they're given like a low incentive or boring task. And so the way I describe it is like, let's say there's a light, and on this side it's the prefrontal cortex, and then there's a switch, and then there's your default mode network. When the switch is flipped up, this prefrontal cortex is on, and then the default mode network's off. And then when it's turned the other way, now your prefrontal cortex is off and your default mode network's on. So people with ADHD, when the prefrontal cortex is on, the default mode network is still kind of on. So it's like they're daydreaming while trying to do this like boring or like low incentive task. And one of the studies that looked at this, they took the three different groups of people. They took people with ADHD, unmedicated, people with ADHD who were medicated, and then neurotypicals, and they gave them the low incentive task. So neurotypicals, the default mode network turned all the way off. People who had ADHD but were medicated, it also turned all the way off. And then the people with ADHD who weren't medicated, it didn't turn all the way off. One of the things that I found super interesting was if you give them a high incentive task, so either interesting or like some sort of reward behind it, the people with ADHD, their default mode network turned all the way off as well. And so I think one of the problem arises is when we're like asking kids or people to do boring tasks that their brain doesn't want to do. It's because then they need to do that task while they're like still daydreaming. And this isn't something that they can just you can't just say, "Oh, I really want to do this," or "I'm really interested in it." Like you can't lie to your brain. Like your brain knows what you're actually interested in.
Just to add in
Yep.
on that, we have a couple people that are interested in kind of on like that medication front of like how that plays into ADHD, and I know you're kind of talking about it here. Someone also mentioned though diet and sleep and how
100%.
that plays a play, and I know it seems like a reward tends to be something along the lines of like a sugary treat or food. I know you spoke earlier about how certain aspects of your health at the beginning was a bit challenging around both exercise and food. What have you learned along the way to either post medication or pre medication or during medication, or even along the way with all of those factors, have you noticed?
Yeah. So one of the things about the sleep and the diet, they absolutely play a role. Um, we can like talk about it now. So for me personally, after the first month of medication, the first month it felt like a miracle drug. And I actually felt kind of upset that people were going through life and they found it that easy. I would think about like, oh, I need to do the laundry, and I would just get up and do it. And normally it would be like this whole ordeal of like trying to trick myself into do it or wait until the last minute or whatever. And so I took medication and it was amazing for the first month. And then after I got used to it, it kind of like wore off a bit. And it still helped with like a thing that I've like termed like task initiation, but I could still very easily just sit there and still scroll on my phone even while I was medicated. And so when I the three things that I did that had the biggest impact on me were getting my sleep in check, doing regular cardio, and quitting drinking. And those three combined, for me personally, had a bigger effect than even my medication did. And if I take my medication while I'm doing those things, it has an even bigger effect. And then when it comes to like what I've learned about it, is I think when you're younger, your brain's still developing. And I think people with ADHD they're drawn to dopamine. And so the things that you're drawn to when you're a kid, I think a lot of the times they kind of just continue to when you're older. And so because I wasn't allowed to move around as much, or I wasn't into sports, my two main sources of dopamine were reading and eating. And so now I've always been like a stress eater, boredom eater, like any kind of change in my state, I'm eating something. And so being aware of that and then just putting systems in place to stop myself from eating unhealthy choices is really important. So being aware of like what your dopamine sources are and what you're drawn to, and kind of putting things in place to minimize that to a degree that you're happy with, and then make it as easy as possible to get dopamine sources from like healthy things like exercising and stuff like that.
I know you were also kind of talking about how when you had challenges with your space being not just kind of overwhelming and a little overstimulating. I know some buzzwords that in the community it's kind of mirroring. So like having someone just there while you're doing the task. Like they don't even have to be doing anything, but it's almost like having that witness or having that sense of community, it makes it a lot easier. Um, would you say that's something that would be supportive for not only like adults but also young people? Because
100%.
and maybe that can also be seen as like, 'cause I think that's one thing that we see a lot with parents is, oh, like my kid's so needy and so like whatever, but they don't realize that when you're able to self-regulate and support your child through these challenging situations, whether that be laundry or dishes and whatnot, that later on they gain that confidence within themselves to do it later on. Like, what are your thoughts with that?
The There's a couple of things. So body doubling is absolutely an amazing technique. I do it all the time. I think that a lot of the times people who come from chaotic or traumatic backgrounds, I think like radical independence is something where they don't want to ask for help. And so I always took a lot of pride on being able to do it myself. And then I beat myself up when I couldn't. Now I use body doubling all the time, and I ask for help all the time, and I think it's really valuable. And I have friends who like they'll body double for me, and then I'll body double for them, and it's just something that we do on a regular basis. And I think it's something that people should do more, and then not be ashamed for it. And so it's like, let's say on Saturday somebody comes over, and then you clean up your house while they sit there and do some kind of like bookkeeping or something. Then you go over to their place, and then they clean up theirs. The other thing when it comes to like kids and stuff like that, I'm a really firm believer of if you're going to have expectations for them, uh, expect the outcome, but be really flexible on how you get there. And so, say, I want you to help out in the house. Your chore for this week is doing the laundry. Whatever you need to do to get the laundry done is fine. If you need me to body double for you, that's totally fine. If you find out you're being distracted by your phone, like we don't judge ourselves for being distracted. Everyone gets distracted, but now we need to develop a system to be able to mitigate that. And so really empowering people to figure out what works for them in every aspect. And then just being aware that it's going to be different for everybody. Like I could go off and I could tell you every single system that I have, and it doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. The way that I was able to find all my systems is I would like have my goal, and then I would like get a whole bunch of information from a bunch of different places. I get a whole bunch of advice, and I would just try things over and over and over again until I found out what worked for me and worked for me all the time. Like if something only works for me like 50% of the time or 60% of the time, it's not like a done system, and I need to keep on finding things. And I think teaching people that as a skill, if you just teach them that one thing, and then they believe in themselves, I think like they'll be able to figure it out. And I think really trusting kids to be able to figure it out for themselves is really important, and empowering them to be able to do that.
I really liked that you were kind of just going back to that point of strength base and like coming from more of a um caring perspective instead of a judgmental or shameful way that we tend to usually see these cases with. And you kind of mentioned a little bit about how trauma doesn't play an impact into your experience with ADHD. We had a couple people like how like do you separate the two? Do you like understand that the two kind of coexist, or like what is your process with that?
So they absolutely coexist. It's a little further on the slides, but we can go over it like right now. So one, ADHD is like absolutely genetic. I think it's as like inheritable as like height is per se. But there also trauma also does play a role. And so there's a term called like ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that as the rates of ACEs go up, the rates of ADHD go up, and also the severity of ADHD goes up. And so I think it's one of the reasons why Indigenous communities experience it at a higher rate than other, just because of like what we collectively have all gone through that your parents went through. And so if my parents, when I was like being born, if they snapped my fingers and made sure that I went through no ACEs whatsoever, if they had gone through them, I would already be at a higher chance of having ADHD. Regardless of everything else. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that like play into it. And if you look at both what happened to Indigenous people and then the situations that we were put in, like dealing with racism from the government, being kept in poverty because of the government, racism in the education system, in the police force, in the legal system, like all of those things, I think increases our chances of ADHD. And so I think Indigenous people especially, it's like really good to be aware of this and then not beat yourself up for it and then learn what you need to have to be supported. Like look after yourself first. And then once you are like supported, then you're in a better position to help other people out. I say that when I was going through my mental health crisis, I had to be selfish for the moment so that I could be helpful for now, like in the future. Just like when they tell you in a plane to put your oxygen on first, because if you're not supported, you're not in a position to help other people out. Yeah, so this expecting the person being held underwater to perform at the level of the other person or comparing the two, this is where like the really big hit to the self-esteem I think comes from. And then losing confidence at a young age, in my opinion, is one of the most damaging things that can happen. And then this is like a 5-minute video, but I find it really, really important. Pretty much what happened in that video is they were at a classroom and they were given these things called like anagrams, which is like a word all scrambled up. And they said, when you're done the first word, just raise your hand. And then half of the room raises their hand. And then the other half of the room is kind of like looking over. And then she's like saying, this is easy. It's not supposed to be a big deal. Just put up your hand when you're done. And the one half of the room wasn't able to do it. So she's like, we're going to go on to the next question. The same thing repeats. And then on the third one, the exact same thing happens. And then when it kind of like wraps up, she tells them that half of the room was given one list and the other half was given the other list. And then the half of the room that wasn't able to do it, their first two problems were like impossible tasks, and they weren't solvable. And so it's this term called like learned helplessness, and it's pretty much when you fail once, you start to lose confidence in yourself, and then you think that you're going to fail in the future. And what I found really interesting about the video is she was able to like make that happen within 5 minutes. Uh, the reason why I like that video is it kind of sums up perfectly what I experienced at home. And so my mom had certain expectations for me at home, and I could never live up to them because of how my brain like worked. And then I went to school and I had all of these tasks, and they were like, do your homework, pay attention, do all these other things. And I also couldn't live up to them. And so for me, those were like impossible tasks. And because my entire like childhood slash time through school, I was constantly getting told over and over again, just through like the circumstances, that I wasn't capable. That was a belief that I had for myself, and that's kind of like what I carried on into the future. Yeah, so this learned helplessness at a young age, while the brain is developing, can stay with them for the rest of their life. And yeah, and so I this is what I felt all the way through post-secondary. And then so this is just like long-term outcomes for people with ADHD, treatment versus non-treatment. And there's a 351 studies, and they looked at like these 9 categories. And what they found in pretty much all of them was that people with ADHD kind of just had worse like outcomes. And so what they found was like without treatment, people with ADHD had poor long-term outcomes in all categories compared to people without. And then treatment for people with ADHD improved long-term outcomes compared to untreated, but like not to like quote unquote like normal levels. And one of the things that I want to say is like that can be really depressing. And I want to say like just because it's a statistic doesn't make it a sentence. And when I look at that list, what I see is like these are the areas of my life that I need to be more aware of and put more work into to make sure that it doesn't hold me back. And so like left to my own devices, these are where I might struggle, but I can work hard, know more about myself, and I can make sure that it doesn't hold me back from reaching my goals. So what contributes to ADHD? We've talked about a couple of this. And so I can't go into all the different things. I'm going to talk about environmental factors, which is like ACEs, genes, and then cortisol. So ACEs, it started off as these abuse, neglect, mental illness, incarcerated relative or parent, domestic violence, substance use, and divorce. And then they expanded it to include racism, bullying, community violence, living in foster care, and neighborhood safety. This is one of the like reviews that I like looked at the most. And so it looks at how ACEs affects ADHD, and this was done in 2023. So it looked at 43 studies. So children who encountered ACEs were also found to have less gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex, among other areas. And that prefrontal cortex is the thing that's associated with ADHD. So higher ACE score, higher prevalence of any mental health condition, and the presence of ACEs is also associated with more severe ADHD symptoms. Compared to children with no ACEs, the odds of ADHD diagnosis were 1.39, 1.92, and 2.72 times higher among children with 1, 2, and 3 or more ACEs. And so down on the left-hand side, you have the children with no ACEs, children with 1 to 3, and children with 4 or more. And then from left to right, you see the rates of ADHD, behavior disorder, anxiety, and depression. So children with no ACEs, the rates are 6%, 4%, 5%, and 1%. And children with 4 or more had 19%, 19%, 20%, and 15%. A 3 to 15 times increase. That's a good point. Yeah, so just cortisol, chronic exposure to high levels of cortisol has been linked to reduction in gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex. I want to point out that like ADHD, even like not including the ACEs, it's still a thing, and it's highly inheritable. Like if your parents have it, you likely have it. A lot of the times, parents themselves will get diagnosed when their child is getting diagnosed. And this is just like a description on how trauma can get passed down through like gene expression. This is a study that was done in 2022, and it looked at like the how ACEs of a parent affected ADHD in children. And so the 3 points: parental ACEs have an intergenerational effect on offspring. Screening for parental ACEs is imperative and should be incorporated, just for their kids' sake. And then the last one is the thing that I really want to highlight, and this is the health effects of ACEs may not be limited to the exposed individual, highlighting the need for a two-generation approach. This is just like reiterating that like even if I didn't go through anything and I had the perfect childhood, if my parents or grandparents had it, there's a chance that I have it as well. And so some people don't necessarily believe the epigenetic or gene expression thing, and like that's totally fine. But that last study that we looked at, there's like a rat shock test that they did. They looked at Civil War veterans, their offspring, Holocaust survivors, their offsprings, young computer veterans, and what all of those studies found was that like it does transfer. And so what I am confident in believing is that this intergenerational transmission of trauma, like it is real. The mechanism behind it, while it might be interesting, it's kind of beside the point. And then one of the reasons why I think this like affects Indigenous communities, there's like a study that was done in 2021, and it looked at the rates of ACEs compared to like other racial and ethnic groups. And then what it found was like Native American people reported the greatest average number and variety of ACEs than persons from any other racial or ethnic group. Um, and then like it's one study, but then also like my lived experience, I think I have a pretty good childhood compared to a lot of Indigenous people. My parents didn't drink in the house or do drugs or anything like that. My mom was like pretty strict and harsh. But like still like I look back on my childhood fondly, but even I had like a high amount of ACEs growing up. So I think if you take any group of people and put them through what our people went through in like residential school and then everything that followed, I think you would find them finding the exact same kind of struggles that our people are currently having. So like just generations of our ancestors going through trauma, communities intentionally kept in poverty, facing racism in school, society, and the government, imprisoned at higher rates, kids taken away at higher rates. Every single one of those things increases the chances of ADHD and other mental health problems. So yeah, it's like my personal belief that more Indigenous people have undiagnosed ADHD than people realize. I absolutely don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. Like I talk about my ADHD, like I talk about needing glasses or how tall I am. And one of the things I really want to do is like dispel the stigma where people think it's somehow tied to intelligence, because I think that's something that a lot of people are hung up on. So these are some stories that I had from post-secondary. In my philosophy classes, I got 90% and 100% on all my papers. In psychology, I did so well on my test that my professor pointed me out to all the other students and told them that they should study like me. And then in math, it was like 2 or 3 weeks into my semester, and I went to the professor and I asked to join their class. And she told me that she didn't want to let me because they were having a midterm coming up on Monday. And I said, just let me take the test. And if I do well, let me in the class. And if I don't do well, I'll take it next semester. I studied for 2 days and I got the second highest mark in the class. Um, and so like those were some of like my highlights from post-secondary. And then in criminology, because it was more paper-based, I had an assignment and I wasn't able to, like I did all the readings and I had a lot of ideas, but I just couldn't get my thoughts down on paper. And so like at the like last minute, I tried to put it down and then I handed it in and I got back like this is totally unacceptable and I got 35%. And then because of the learned helplessness that I had, that was the only thing I focused on. And so I didn't recognize any of the things that I did well. And I only focused on the things that I wasn't doing well. And I think it kind of like plays out when you like look at the stats of like what Indigenous people are facing. So this is like Stats Canada stats. The darker blue is 2016, lighter blue is 2021. On the far right, you can see the rates that non-Indigenous people get a bachelor's degree or higher from 25 to 64, and it's about like 35%. And then if you look at Indigenous people, we're in the range of like somewhere between 10 and 15%. And I don't for a minute think that they're smarter than us or more passionate than us or more driven than us. Um, I think we're like come from like chaotic households sometimes with parents who are like having troubles processing their unhealed trauma. And then we go into a school system that isn't designed for us. And then it kind of just like embeds in us that we're not capable. And so then we either don't go or we go. And then if we struggle, we drop out because we don't think that we're capable of it. And the reason why I say this is because that's what I felt. And like I'm in this stat because I wanted to be a lawyer to help out Indigenous communities. That was my goal when I was younger. But the struggle that I had, like that one class that I struggled in, is like the reason why I dropped out. And so like this 20% gap, like regardless of how big your community is, let's say there's 1,000 people in your community, that's like 200 people that don't think they're capable or competent enough to go to school. And I just think it's like a tragedy. Yeah. Yeah, this is just my personal belief of just like grandparents experiencing ACEs, probably undiagnosed mental health problems, trouble with emotional regulation, and then talk down to, and then pass it on to the parents who pass it on to the kids. So yeah, the parents that never had a chance to probably process, and they're doing their absolute best for their kid, but they're doing it with, I think, probably a lot of times a smaller like executive function fuel tank. And then the demands of being a parent require you to be more organized, remember things, motivate yourself, control your impulses. And so one of the first things to go would probably be your emotional regulation. And so I'm going to skip over some of this because I really want to talk about like some of the highlights. Yeah, and so I really want to talk about this, and I know we're running out of time. So I've had a lot of time and space, and I wanted to like reflect on like what Indigenous communities were like before and compare it to how we are now. And so I'm very coastal. I'm Haida and Kwakiwak. And so we're big house people, we're potlatch people, and we're also like clan people. Um, and so in a clan system, like who's looking after the kids? And so parents, they can do their breastfeeding, and then when their kid's old enough and the parent, like the mom has to go back to work, from what I've been told, they would go to their grandparents And so the grandparents have seen it all before, done it all before. Their executive function is the highest out of anybody in their clan. They have the most amount of emotional regulation, and they can devote it all to like that kid. And they're also in a good place to teach the kid the things that I think are really important when they're that young, which are things like values and culture, and what's important to like your family and your community. The responsibility of like food, shelter, and security, that's all in the clan. It's not put on one family, so like two people, or if you're a single parent, not all in one person. I think the nuclear family, just like this, the parents and kids just living in one house, I think it's kind of a mistake that like Europeans and non-Indigenous people had to do, and I think we're kind of like forced to adopt it, even though it's like not a very good system. When you are looking at like what professions kids would do, from what I've been told, they would wait to see what you were interested in, and then they would go and put you onto that. And so if you're getting people that are interested in something, you don't need to worry about this like default mode network, even if somebody does have ADHD, because like they're following their own passion and what interests them. Kids learn by doing in that system, and so it's like activity-based learning rather than this like passive form of learning that we like are like currently having to do. Adults have external motivation, the body doubling or mirroring that you're talking about earlier, working alongside nieces and nephews. And then kids get to learn by modeling. I think it's kind of strange that like we put kids in like daycare, elementary school, and high school while adults are doing work, and then we just expect them to be able to like catch up. I think before you would have gotten to see on a daily basis like what people are doing. Um, I don't know if we're gonna have the time to be able to do all the rest of it. Do we want to stop now to like open it up to questions?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be great. We have quite a few here. I think you kind of touched on a lot of them. One of them that I keep noticing is, um, sorry, I had
It's all
it
good.
queued up and then I got distracted. Uh, so you were kind of talking about the ACEs and how that can influence the number of people who are experiencing or diagnosed with ADHD. Do you think, from your experience, there's a really great question up here. This person says, from the viewpoint of Gabor Mate, that ADHD is not only neurodevelopmental, neurodevelopmental.
Yep.
There is some weight that environmental, especially in infancy, relational factors like early life stressors are also factors to ADHD, that this can then, the theory.
If these are mitigated, there could be an improvement in symptoms. But yeah, I absolutely agree. So the ACEs is like the reason why like they call it is like adverse childhood experiences. And so like any kind of stress that's going on in like early childhood development. So I think like the really big windows, it's all the way up until you're like in your 20s, but especially 0 to 3 and then like 3 to 10 are like the big ones. Any kind of outside stress that's happening in that time can play a huge role. And I think teaching teaching everybody, I think every Indigenous person should know about executive function and then how to get the most out of what they have and be taught about it, emotional regulation, taught communication skills. Because like I think the goal should be like obviously is like making an environment that's as stable and healthy as possible for everybody, but especially kids that are in that age.
Definitely. And you're kind of talking about how, from your background, just like from your community, but also just through your family systems, how historically we would have like a village taking care of one child rather than just a family, or like parents taking care of one child, and how the modeling of different roles within the community is seen throughout the day instead of siloed uh, facilities like it is in colonial settings. Would you say this is one of the reasons why it's hard to support our community who are experiencing ADHD? And like, would you say by having more cultural supports or even cultural community spaces like this would benefit people who and families who are experiencing ADHD?
100%. I think the sense of community is super important. And I think one of the, and this is like, so I haven't lived in my community for a long time, so I'm like in the city. But whenever I go home, like you always hear that phrase, like people in the community have to wear a lot of hats. And I think one of the things is when you're living in community, all those hats require more executive function. And so it's because like a lot of different people and families are struggling, it means that there are just like less people there to like to do the work, and so then all of that mental load gets put on like whoever is there and is capable, um, and like teaching them how to support themselves, having environments where they're able to support themselves and support each other, and then just be open about like talking about it and like what everyone's struggling with, just to let other people know that they're not alone. There are so many times where like I've been talking with other Indigenous people about the struggles that I had with like body doubling and motivation and stuff. And when I'm talking about it, oftentimes I see their like eyes start to water as they talk about experiences like that they're going through. Because if you're not, if you don't know that other people are going through it like you're going through it, it can feel very like isolating. And I think it's just really reassuring to know that other people are going through it, and that you can like rely on each other if you need to.
So on that topic, so you were kind of talking about it took you like some time to process that you needed help. What sort of suggestions or recommendations do you have to even just start, like baby steps to get to that point? Because I know sometimes it takes a while to practice asking for help, whether that be helping with grocery
Yeah.
shopping or meal prep or whatnot. How do you do that? And then also, like, if you, like, as someone who is living with ADHD and you notice maybe a friend or a colleague who has symptoms, but maybe not asking for help, but you can visibly see that they might need help. How do you do that in a way that's not invasive?
Yeah, I think I forgot the first part of the question already. For people, oh, that for people who are wanting to practice, I think starting small, like all the progress I made was like incremental steps. And so if you do have a hard time asking for help, just like find somebody that you're like the most comfortable with, and then just ask for them for help with something small. So like don't go around asking everybody all at once. Just ask with them over and over again. And as you get more comfortable, ask more people. Now that I've done it a lot, I'm shameless for asking for help. I'll ask everybody for help. And I expect that most people are going to say no, but that doesn't stop me from asking. The second thing that I do is when you're talking about, I see someone's struggling, but they might not have asked is and I do this for everybody, but especially if there's young Indigenous people around, is I will talk about what I'm struggling with just around them. And so it's just like, especially for young kids, I'll talk about my struggles with education. I'll talk about my struggles with device use and what I've done. And so a lot of the times I'll have that conversation with somebody else that's in the room, but I make sure that they can overhear it. Just to again, like let them know that whatever struggles they might be facing, like they're not alone and that it is normal. And then they at least get to hear what I've done to support myself. And so I'm like, if you're ever around me, I always talk about the struggles that I've had and what I've done. It's like I won't shut up about it pretty much.
With that, do you find that people are a bit more receptive to being like, to have a conversation with you afterwards about like, hey, like I actually experienced that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this one memory that sticks out especially. It's like I started a new job and I was having a coffee with somebody and it was just like our get to know each other thing. I told my story first, told him all about my mental health struggles, told him about everything that I went through. And then when it was his turn, he said something along the lines of just like, oh, I don't know if this is an overshare, but you shared so much. I guess I can. So he told me that what he was going through and what he had gone through. And I'd only seen him in a professional setting. And he seemed so put together that I was kind of like blown away. And we actually found that both of us didn't really like long, wordy like emails. And whenever we would email each other afterwards, we would always be straight and to the point, and we didn't have to wonder if it was being rude or like make it really wordy. And I think it was really powerful, at least for me at that moment, to realize that because I think a lot of times people are just acting in a way that's expected from them and not necessarily acting in the way that like works best for them. And if you just are open with what you're going through, it gives other people the chance to also be open about it. And then you can find out what you have in common and then drop the things that aren't working for you.
That kind of talks about like what you were talking about earlier about modeling vulnerability and modeling what you need so that other people are able to also follow in line with that, like whether that be sharing what they need or also just connecting to similar cases, which is really cool. And then tying into that, it seems like a lot of people are really interested in resources for youth. Someone particularly was wondering if you do talks for communities around this, like specifically for youth, and like do you provide like a similar presentation where it's kind of like your story, diagnosis, medications, whether it worked for you or not, and then all the other systems. What are your how like can you speak to that?
Yeah. I've been doing presentations like this for about like a year now. I started fall of last year. I do presentations for communities like all the time. I think I have 7 presentations in these like in 3 weeks, and I think this is like my 5th one right now. And a lot of the times I have it like if people don't know what to ask for, I have like my default where I kind of go everything. The best format that I found is like 2 days where I do my experience slash what ADHD like is and like what causes it, and then the other half of the day is like how to build systems to support yourself like as an adult, and then the second day is like things to know about like children specifically, and then how to build systems for kids. Uh, a lot of times people don't have the time for the 2 days, and so I get asked to condense it down to one, and so I've done that. And then after that, some people will say like a half a day or like an hour and a half, kind of like right now. And then I just, as I get less and less time, it's harder and harder to talk about the topics to the extent that would work really well. But yes, I absolutely do talks for communities and stuff. Although I've overbooked myself for the fall, and so I think like in the future I might only do like 1 or 2 because I'm still like trying to get my business off the ground. And so like anytime I do something like this, it just like takes away time from that. But I'll try to do at least like 1 or 2 a month as long as people are interested.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so many more questions. You're kind of talking about therapies. Were you talking more so like medication, personal, holistic? Can you elaborate on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of things that you can do. Like I was saying before, like running did like a lot of like wonders for me. Out of all the different things, like I call them like interventions, all the different interventions you can do, cardio is one of the absolute best. I highly recommend it to like every Indigenous person, everybody struggling with ADHD, should be on some sort of cardio program. And a lot of the times it's like even as little as like 30 minutes twice a week can drastically reduce ADHD symptoms. Um, Getting your sleep in check, all of those sorts of things. From the approach that I took was I wanted to do everything that I could to give myself the best shot. And then when I came off medication, I wanted to see what my limits were. I wanted to see what I could do and what I couldn't do after I already like knew a bunch about it and I was doing everything to support myself. So I did all of the things that you know like you're supposed to do, the exercise, the sleeping, all that kind of stuff. And then I spent a bunch of time like building like what I call systems. And systems are any struggle that I have, like let's say my cell phone use, is I'll build a system to mitigate specifically that. And then if I have problems with focusing or motivation, I'll build a system just to support that. Once I had all my systems, I wanted to see what I was capable of. That's when I came off my medication. And now I just use my medication like as needed, and so it's like if I haven't been sleeping well, if I've been on the road a lot, if I have like presentation prep that I need to do, I might use it for 1 to 3 days type of thing or as I need it. But I always know that it's in my back pocket. And I also want to like kind of like destigmatize medication because it kind of gets a bad rap. It absolutely changed my life, and I don't know if I would be where I am right now without it. But I know it's a very personal decision. And so, one, I don't think you should be judged for using it. But then I also don't think that you should be judged for not using it. I think it's just whatever your goals are, and it's just something that I have that I can use whenever I need to.
Definitely, yeah. I think I really liked that you were saying, um, not judgment, but also like figuring out your baseline. I find that healthcare providers are always jumping the gun to um by over prescribing or prescribing and not allowing patients or clients the way to guide how they want to be, and maybe figuring out their baseline, maybe not even allowing them to have that option. So I appreciate that you shared that and that that was along the process of figuring out what systems work for you and navigating that. And with that, did you find
So there's one point I want to talk about on that.
yeah.
So when I got diagnosed with CPTSD, I went to my family doctor, and he like diagnosed me. He wanted to prescribe me right away. And I had just been spending so much time like learning how my brain worked, and I just literally just got that news that day. I was just like, I know you mean well, and so this is no like shot against them or anything like that. I just want to figure out if I can like manage this on my own and just like learn about how my brain works. And so I went home and I like look up a whole bunch of research papers, and I found out how people address CPTSD, and I figured out what might work for me. And then I took my little plan and I went to my therapist, and I was like, I just got diagnosed with CPTSD. This is what I'm planning. Does it look okay? And then she gave me some feedback. She's like, make sure that you stop if your physical safety's ever gone, and then make sure you have somebody that you can call. And so I added that to my little plan. And then I went to my doctor. I'm like, this is what I'm planning on doing to address my CPTSD. Does it look okay? And then he gave it the go ahead as well. And so after that, December and January, I went through and I like did my plan. And by the end of it, my CPTSD had resolved enough that I didn't necessarily need to go on my medication. I'm so glad that it was there as an option, but I was really thankful that I at least gave myself a chance to figure it out. And I also had time off work, and so I was able to do that. I know it's a lot harder for people that don't have that extra time.
Definitely. Yeah. And with the process along that, you were kind of talking about diet again. What foods and natural medicines and vitamins do you use that have you noticed that helped with your ADHD?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch. Like you can like Google like what supplements like help ADHD. I forget if this is the actual term, but it's like ABA testing. I tried it with the supplement, like I did each one individually, and then I would do 2 weeks without it, and I check to see how I was doing, and then I go back with it. The one that helped me the most was like omega-3s, and it's also part of my daily like routine. And then the other one, and this was an ADHD related, but just like my vitamin D. As far as other stuff, um, the artificial food coloring, there's a couple of research studies out there that show that if you like omitted artificial food coloring from your diet, you can see up to like a 10% reduction in ADHD symptoms. And so whenever possible, I try to just like eat healthy food, and with like no artificial food coloring. Those are the main things that I do when it comes to my diet.
Great. And just last two questions here. So you were kind of talking about like your childhood and how like certain things you wish you would have known for like when you were a youth or whatnot. Can you give maybe like your top 3 to 5 things that you would recommend to either someone who is a youth or a young adult or a parent that is parenting both a youth or a young adult?
I think so for both cases. One, if you're the youth, uh, if you are struggling with self-esteem or confidence, you can absolutely change that. And just by changing how you're thinking and like doing some work. And for changing belief, like I think you need to for building confidence, you need belief and then you need evidence. And I could go into like how to like build belief, but I don't think we have enough time. And then for a parent, I think uh one, learning about how much space you have, and then making sure that you have enough to regulate your own emotions, and then always approaching any kind of setback that a kid might have as just a learning experience. So, like, not getting mad at them and then just being like, what did we learn from this, and what are we going to do tomorrow? And building that mindset in really early, and really building in this is the goal that I have for you. How are you going to get there? And then I'm here for advice if you need to, but you can figure this out on your own, because at some point you're not going to be there, and them believing in their own ability to figure out a problem, I think is really valuable.
Okay, sorry. One really good question just popped up, so I'm going to say 2 more
Yeah.
questions. Is there a word that you found for ADHD, for example, in like in either your Indigenous language or just through the research you've done? This person's example was the Maori used the word takiwa fataga, which means in their own time and space.
Yeah. I haven't like heard about the term for ADHD in either Haida or Kwakwala. This is not nearly as nice as that. I like the term neurospicy, just because like neurodivergent seems a little too clinical, and so I always call myself as neurospicy.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, can you rename the book and let us know if can we post the links to the audience afterwards that you renamed
What book?
the one you wrote?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I wrote a baby book. It's called Is Baby Under There? You can absolutely post it. I did one in Hyde and I did one in Kwakula. Well, I need to add that it was like I got a lot of help from like fluent speakers to get it done. I didn't recognize them on the book, and that was kind of like I was getting it made when I was going through my dad passing away, and I just like had no capacity, and so I just needed it off my plate. And so it's one of the big mistakes that I've done, and I haven't gotten a chance to apologize for that properly. Um, is it okay if I say those like last three ending points that I had? Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to point out, because I know it's kind of depressing and there are a lot of things that we can do. I want to point out like the two strengths that I think Indigenous communities really have. And as one is like not everybody needs to know everything. I remember my mom took me out of school when I was in elementary school for 2 weeks to learn how to weave spruce roots and cedar, and I was there with all my old aunties. So I don't think anybody in our community knew how, but it only took one person to come in and teach everybody else for it to kind of like flourish again. And then the other thing is how committed Indigenous communities are to improving things for the next generation. And so I think my dad had ADHD and he passed away and he never learned. I'm now learning and as an adult. And so what we can do now is like make sure that kids growing up don't have to face the same struggles. And as long as we are dedicated to always improving, like things are trending in a better direction. And I always compare my grandparents' generation to my parents, to mine, to my nieces and nephews. And I think we are making progress. And then two people I also want to talk to is there are a lot of like parents who are in my courses or workshops or whatever, who they get emotional because they are realizing what their kids went through and how harsh they were on them. And one of the things I want to tell you is if you showed up every day and you did your best, like that's all your family could expect from you. There was not to get too deep into it, but when my family was like dealing with my dad's passing away, there was a lot of big tempers. And I was beating myself up because I was like, this is your only job was to keep your family together and you're messing that up as well. And so I had to reflect on like what should be expected of me in that situation. And so I imagined myself in a different situation where I was moving and a friend was going to help me. And I asked myself if they showed up every day and they didn't go to their job and every moment they were trying to help me pack and move and we still didn't get it done, could I hold that against them? And I like decided that you couldn't. The only thing anybody can expect of anybody is that you do your best. And so for any parent out there who's like, looking back and wishing things were different. If you showed up and you did your best, that's all your family needed. And for younger people or for people who don't have kids that they're looking after, I think it's really important to realize nobody gets to pick what cards they're dealt. And when you get on your own, no matter where you are, no matter if you're struggling with self-esteem, anxiety, depression, the rest of it, that was your family and your community. They took you as far as you could. And so realizing that like it's on you to progress past that and do better for the next generation. It's on you and you have that capability. Um, and yeah, and to just be more gentle with yourself. So yeah, those are the things that I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you so much, Cody.
Yep. Oh yeah, so I have a whole bunch of like the research papers. If people want it, I can pass that along and I can like send them the system building that I'm sending some of the community, the email form. And then if people are wanting me to come do a workshop for them, then you can go to my contact info and that's my link tree.
We'll also post these links on the landing page afterwards for anyone who doesn't want to use the QR code.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. It's been so great to discuss ADHD and hear about your experience and how that has shaped your reality and what sort of supports you've gained along the way. I know it's just been very prevalent in society, and I think it's great that we're finding different supports to make it more strength-based. So
100%.
thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And just before we end this webinar, I'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming webinars. We have two-eyed seeing in health with naturopathic medicine and Indigenous wellness. That's with Dr. Sarah Connors. That's on October 10th, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we also have an information session for Indigenous Health Administration and Leadership Program, and that is on October 16th, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. All of our webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningscircle.ubc.ca. And if you are not already registered for our newsletter, feel free to sign up. We always send our upcoming webinars and any other cool information that's going on at the center. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you all have a great day. Lim Lim, thank you.